What's up, everybody? Joe Brown here. This is the Heresy Financial Show, and Americans are in one of the worst places financially they've been maybe ever. We are seeing three major things happening right now as a result of the whole mess with monetary policy, fiscal policy, inflation, shortages, everything like that. So in this video, we're going to look at these three metrics. Number one, debt. Number two, savings. Number three, we're going to look at spending habits, and we're going to look at the true reason why Americans right now are in the worst financial position maybe they have ever been in. Ready? Let's dive in. Today's sponsor is Masterworks. Today's investors face a huge dilemma because inflation is at its highest point in 40 years. In response, the Fed is now starting a phase of aggressive monetary tightening. Because of this, top firms are predicting stock market returns of 5% or less through 2035. This means that restructuring your portfolio has never been more difficult and never been more crucial. So where can you turn? Well, a recent report from JP Morgan declared that alternative assets are no longer just optional. In light of this new normal, certain platforms have risen, giving people access to the top alternative asset classes. And there's one in particular that impresses me. It's called Masterworks. Masterworks has solidified its position as being the platform to invest in contemporary art. They let you access their exclusive investments from artists like Banksy, Monet, and other iconic artists for just a fraction of what billionaires pay to purchase. Because roughly 2/3 of billionaires allocate between 10 and 30% of their overall portfolio to art, in part to diversify and also because it's a natural inflation hedge. And speaking of returns, contemporary art has outpaced the S&P 500 total return by 164% from 1995 to 2021. And it has exhibited the lowest correlation to equities of nearly any asset class. Since inception, Masterworks has sold 3 paintings, each returning over 30% net of fees to investors. Of course, past performance is no guarantee of future performance, but those numbers are quite impressive. And if you would like to skip the waitlist and sign up today, use my link included in the description below. All right, take a look with me at this chart from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. This is the Center for Microeconomic Data, and this is the first thing we are looking at here today, the total debt balance of household debt. So we've got these two sections here, non-housing debt and housing debt. So blue, that's going to be your mortgages. Red is going to be everything else from credit cards to auto loans. And here's where we can break it down even more for this non-housing debt, where we've got auto loans, credit cards, other, and student loans here. So right off the bat, we are seeing, again, still record high amounts of debt for individuals, for Americans. Most Americans have the most debt that they've ever had. Now, do you think this is a good thing or a bad thing right as we are turning the corner into interest rates going up? Well, for the housing debt here, which you can see is the majority of the debt, it's not going to matter. It does absolutely nothing to your mortgage if somebody else's interest rates go up on their new mortgage, right? You've got a fixed rate 30-year loan. That's locked in. Doesn't do anything to you. Interest rates for mortgages could hit 100%. You're locked in at your 3%, 4%, 5%, 6%, whatever you've got. So that part doesn't matter unless you have to move. Then obviously it matters for you. Now, where it does get interesting is when we come over here and look at the non-housing debt, because things like many auto loans, definitely credit cards, a lot of other debt, these are adjustable rate loans. This means that as the Fed pushes interest rates higher and higher, and as the market anticipates more and more persistent and higher inflation, those interest rates will move up. That means that for a lot of everyday Americans, every time you pay your minimum payment, every time you pay your monthly bills are going up even without increasing your debt because the interest rate that you owe is increasing. This is a bad sign, especially considering We are maxed out on debt in America here. Americans have more debt than they ever have, right as we are entering into this phase where allegedly interest rates are going to be going higher and higher and higher. On the current path, that's where we're headed. Not a good sign, especially considering the second metric we're going to look at here, savings. Take a look with me at this chart from the Fed. This is the personal savings rate. Now you can see this chart goes back to 1960, and you can see all along here this personal savings rate has been relatively stable. Obviously, since the early 70s, it's been trending downwards, and then since 2005, started trending upwards a little bit, and then we got this big spike. So we're going to take a look. We'll zoom in here. Big spike when everybody got a bunch of money from their mortgage payments stopping, from their stimulus checks, from asset prices exploding and them selling them. Big explosion in the personal savings rate. And then we started tapering back down. We're at 4.4 as of April, which historically here, 4.4 is very low. This line here is 5. And so for most of history since the 60s, we were not below 5. We are now. So savings have been plummeting. Again, this makes sense given the fact that everybody's loading up their credit cards to pay their bills, to get their groceries. You would expect people to do that after they burn through their savings. And that's about what's happening here. People have spent through their savings and are loading up on debt just to pay the bills, just to buy groceries, just to afford food and gas and rent. Not a good sign. So what is happening here? Well, number one, we've got the macroeconomic perspective that I'll go into here. And then number two, we actually do have a little bit of a personal financial crisis going on, a personal money management crisis. So let's look at the macroeconomic factors that are going on right now. Number one, prices are the information that are communicated to economic actors like individuals about how scarce something is. That's all a price is. It's just information about how scarce something is relative to everything else. So what is the price of money? The price of money is going to be interest rates. So when interest rates are really high, that is communicating to everybody that money is scarce because it's hard to get your hands on money. So what does that mean that money is scarce? It means the savings pool is very low. And so if interest rates are high, you're communicating the savings rate in the system is really low. That means if you're a borrower, you're going out there trying to find somebody who has some savings to lend to you. There's not many people out there who have any savings who can lend to you. And so they can demand a really high interest rate because they've got a lot of borrowers coming to them. And so they're the one in the position of control. They can charge a higher interest rate, and you and everybody want to borrow, and so you're going to have to pay whatever it costs. So that incentivizes the entire system. Hey, rebuild that savings pool because anybody who can get on that side and become a saver, now they can charge a high interest rate to become a lender. And so it incentivizes building up that savings pool. When interest rates are high, it makes it hard to borrow, makes it costly to borrow, so that disincentivizes spending, it incentivizes savings. It says don't take risks. It says be careful with your money, save money, don't spend a lot. And that savings pool gets rebuilt and slowly you transition to the opposite, which is low interest rates. When interest rates are low, the signal, that price information that's getting sent out to economic actors like you and me, that is saying the savings pool is abundant. There's a lot of savings. That means everybody who has a lot of cash, they're all trying to lend it out, but there's not a lot of people to borrow. And so we have to bid against ourselves to push that price of that money down. Anybody out there who's trying to borrow can say, I'd rather borrow from you because you've got a lower interest rate than you. And so it pushes the price of money down because there's a lot of money available to be lent out. So that signal says, hey, I don't need to save. Now would be a good time to borrow because if I save, I'm not going to be rewarded for it with a high interest rate. So I might as well borrow. It says spend because there's a lot of savings. You can take risks. You can start projects because the savings pool is large. So what do we have going on over the last couple of years? Well, artificially, interest rates went down. This is right at a time where everything was, there was a lot of scarcity, there was a lot of fear, there was a market crash. This was a time period when everybody should have been conservative and should have saved and pulled back and been safe, but interest rates were forced down artificially by these central planners. What this did was it sent a signal out to everybody that the savings pool is large. Was the savings pool actually large? Absolutely not. It didn't change the savings pool's size by just sending out checks, because money is like slices in a pizza. You don't create more pizza by putting more slices into it. You just change the measurement of that pizza. Same thing with money. You don't change the amount of wealth in the system by printing more money. You just change how much money it takes to measure that wealth. And so when they sent out a bunch of checks to people, lowered the interest rates, everybody thought the savings pool was large. So people took on more debt. People started spending more. People weren't financially responsible. And that drove prices up. There wasn't as much wealth available in the system as people thought there was. Drove prices up. Shortages started happening everywhere, left and right, for 2.5 years straight now. And now we are at a point where the savings pool, people are realizing, is actually really low, because we were tricked into thinking the savings pool is large with the interest rates being really low, and turns out that wasn't the case. And so we spent a lot more than we really had, because the signal being sent out was that the savings pool was abundant when it was actually very scarce. So that's the macroeconomic side of what is going on with this crisis right now. But we have to look at the other side of this coin, which is a personal financial crisis, a personal money management crisis. Take a look with me at this article from Bloomberg. 1/3 of Americans making $250,000 live paycheck to paycheck, this survey finds. And if we break it down by demographics with this chart here, this black line is going to be millennials, the blue lines are going to be boomers, and you can take a look at the ranges here of salaries, so 100 to 150K, all the way up to 250K, and we can see across the board that millennials are reporting living paycheck to paycheck far more than boomers. Now, this could have something to do with the amount of people in your household, right? Absolutely. This could have something to do with having kids at home. Millennials have kids at home versus boomers. Their kids are out of the house. Absolutely 100%. However, even with prices going up, if you're making $250,000 and you're living paycheck to paycheck, that's your fault. It's not the government's fault. That's your fault. It's not anybody else's fault. It's not the bank's fault. It's not your parents' fault. It's your fault for making decisions to not save money, to not invest your money, to not control your expenses. Yes, we should increase our income, but yes, we should also control our expenses and make sure that we're being financially responsible. Because if you're making $250,000 living a paycheck to paycheck, guess what? There are people making far less money than that right now who are still surviving. They're not thriving, but they're still surviving. There are households with more than 2 people, more than 4 people, sometimes more than 6 people earning less than $100,000 in the household. You got 2 people making $50,000, bringing home the money, $100,000 for the household, still surviving. You've got many households that are doing even less than that. A couple people in the household making minimum wage, working 1 or 2 jobs. You're still surviving. Not thriving, but surviving. So even with inflation, even with the shortages, even with all the crazy stuff going on right now, even with mortgage rates skyrocketing and house prices going up, if you're making $250,000 living paycheck to paycheck, it's time to look in the mirror, because times are about to get tough. You better buckle down now, because whether we have hyperinflation in the future or a deflationary death spiral in the future, you don't want to look back at the last couple of years and say, man, I wish I would have. I regret not doing this. I regret spending all my money. I regret not saving it. I should have done this. I should have been more careful, should have been more responsible. You don't want to have to look back and think to yourself, man, I wish. You want to make sure that if you had the ability to prepare, you had the ability to get safe, you had the ability to buy some assets that were hedges against crashes and hedges against inflation, that you did so. That way, if we do encounter some hard times, which is almost inevitable, you don't have to look back at that and say, I wasted it all. You are able to look at your stockpile and say, glad I did this, so that you can survive through the hard times and come out stronger and better on the other side. So don't be normal. Normal is looking at your household debt and seeing your student loans, your credit card debt, your auto loan, your mortgage going up and up and up every year and having all-time high levels of debt. Normal is looking at your personal savings rate and seeing that your savings rate is less than it has been your entire life, that you have less saved up to survive on than you ever have. Normal is making more and more and more money each year and spending all of it and acting as if you never made any more money, keeping that hedonic treadmill going and going and going, and normal is not getting yourself set up for success regardless of how good or how hard the times are ahead. Don't be normal. You can do better. As always, really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.